one of the things that I'm always curious about is, we talk about communication, which sometimes people forget that it includes written and nonverbals and the oral speech. But when we talk about speaking, we think of that as a form of communication as well. What's the difference between the two, and where does listening fit into that?
Oh, I love that question. My PhD is in communication, and the best way that I can explain it is think of communication as a circle, and that whole circle is called communication. And then split that circle in half, and half of it is sending messages. And oftentimes we send messages through speaking, or as you said, through our nonverbals. And then the other half of that circle is listening or receiving messages. And again, oftentimes we receive the messages verbally from people. Other times we receive those messages non-verbally from people. So the difference is, speaking is part of sending messages, but half of communication is really listening. And what's sad is that only about 2% of the population ever receives any listening training at all. It's assumed that just because most of us are born with the ability to hear, we can listen, but that's not the case at all, because listening is attaching that meaning to whatever messages we're receiving.
So, Laura, I've heard people talk about reflective listening, active listening. You know, how do you distinguish the two? Because often when we say reflective, we're reflecting back what we've heard in our own words to understand what was being said. But I find that, when we practice repeating back to someone, this is what I think I heard, I don't see that very often practiced unless you are in a therapeutic role.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things, well, two things that you're getting at, Debra, is one of the things that I like to say is that listening is an action when we're talking about listening within the context of communication. Since listening is primarily a cognitive activity, no one can see your brain and know what meaning you're making there. So when we listen, we actually have to reflect back to the speaker, or we have to ask questions that were based on what the speaker just said to demonstrate that we were listening. So the actions of listening really are how we respond to what we've just listened to. And I think that you're absolutely right that most of us don't practice letting the speaker know what we understood. We just assume that everyone understood it the same way who was in the same room. But we know, you and I know, and actually everybody listening to this podcast knows that that's not true, because we've all had those experiences where you're in a meeting with four other people. You think it was a wonderful meeting. You're all on the same page, you believe. You leave the meeting working on what you thought you were supposed to work on. And then a couple days later, you overhear two other people from the meeting talking in the hall about decisions that were made at that meeting, but you don't remember talking about those decisions at all. So really what happens is we have five people in the meeting who think that everybody else is processing information the same way they are. They all walk away thinking everyone's on the same page. And in reality, unless we use some of those strategies to make sure we're on the same page, we are on totally different pages.
I like that you say the same page, and I'm smiling here because I've had some recent conversations that I find frustrating. And the frustration came from, I thought I made it perfectly clear. One was a situation when I was asked if I wanted to go and do something the next day. And I said, you know what? I really want to think it over and I'll let you know in the morning. Well, that individual carried on the next morning, wondering what I was doing, not thinking, it's like, I thought you weren't going. And I'm like, I thought we ended on that this is what was going to happen. And well, I don't remember you saying that. And then the same person, another conversation. And it was just as the person who made the agreement or made the statement or communicated their needs, it was frustrating because I felt dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
And when we feel dismissed, we want to block communication. We don't want to have a conversation with anyone because you feel like nothing you say is going to be heard. And someone said, "Did you turn around and say, did you catch what I said?" And that was when I was like, no, I didn't feel I needed to. That little bit of stubbornness, because again, like you said, not everybody is processing the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe what I'll do is give a little bit of grace and not think that necessarily that communication is bad, but I can tweak it in a different way with ensuring that the other person heard what
Mm-hmm.
I did say and what I would, the decision would be made in the morning.
Yeah. And there are a couple different strategies that you can use there. I love how you said, I thought I made myself perfectly clear, because most speakers think they are being perfectly clear. What they're not accounting for is that the listener may, for a moment, take their attention away from the conversation. Maybe their phone just rang and a text came through, so they were trying to process the text and not really listening to you anymore.
Yeah.
But we don't like to admit that we do those types of things. So we just say, oh, okay, not understanding that you said, I will let you know in the morning. The other thing that I could add from the speaker's perspective on that is, I will text you at 9 a.m. in the morning and let you know if I'm going to be going or not. Will
Right.
9 a.m. work for you? So bringing them into that part of the conversation.
Yeah. Because then it feels like, you were heard, hoping that they're going to respond. But I can see where I can improve, but they can also see where they can improve, because it led to a conversation of, when I'm talking to you, I need eye contact, or I need you to show me that you're hearing what I'm saying, So it is, can be entertaining in retrospect. In the moment, it wasn't.
No, no.
You know?
And it's interesting that you say eye contact, because eye contact is one of those things in the North American culture, which we're both
Yes.
in, that's a physical signal that someone is listening to us. However, any of us who have ever been through high school or college know that we can establish eye contact with a professor and be thinking about something totally differently. So,
Yeah.
eye contact alone does not mean somebody is listening. In fact, this will be a surprise to you, perhaps. There is absolutely no physical signal of listening that we've been able to find that signifies somebody is making that meaning in their mind. We
Yeah.
just assume that eye
Interesting.
contact and facial expressions, and body orientation is it, but it's really not. So
Yeah.
I say that you just have to really pay attention to the words.
Yeah. Because I know, when in some cultures a nod might be that they are hearing you, it doesn't mean that they're understanding what you're saying. It
Yeah.
just can be an action.
Yes.
So what do we need to do to actually really listen well?
That's a big question, isn't it? Well, the first thing that we have to do is, I think we have to begin with a correct mindset. And it's interesting because I have been working in this area of listening for over 25 years now. And I think my newest revelation in the last few years really goes back to the basics of the mindset. And the mindset is, we have to have a desire to understand the other person before we fight to be understood. So,
Mm,
as Covey says, seek first to understand and then to be understood. And kind of linked with that is that idea that we have to listen to understand, not to respond. And that's why I do that seminar and the trainings on strategic silence, because our culture, in part due to electronic communication and media, has become so quick and fast paced that we assume we have to respond right away. But the research actually suggests that the time it takes us to think about the right response is not the silence we generally hold with people. So we are responding automatically to people and not correctly, which is one of the reasons there's so much miscommunication going on out there. Mm-hmm. So to sum up, I think going back to the basics and having the correct mindset that we really want to understand the other. And I guess I would add to that too, and it's dependent upon the context, of course, but I believe it holds for most context. I think in communication, the listener has to be willing to be influenced. And if the listener is not willing to be influenced, then there's no reason to have a discussion. And we all know those people who we kind of hear the nonverbal of, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not going to do anything differently. You can talk to your blue in the face, but nothing's changing here. And that person is not open to listening. So it really doesn't serve us well to use our energy to try to talk to them. So we do have to be open to influence from the other person or the other people in the room.
Yeah, that's very interesting. As I was listening to you, one of the things that came to mind is an experience I had when I was a new leader, an emerging leader. And, I had received an email one time, a couple emails actually. One, of course, the caps, people expressing themselves. Yes. And another one that I was just blown away by the content. And I was shocked at their approach. And I was ready to just, what do you want me to do with this? I went to my boss's office and she said, you don't have to answer every email right away. Mm-hmm.